is episode 279 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm interviewing Abbie Bradford. Abbie is an eczema expert, which is a very uncomfortable skin condition that I actually grew up with, along with acne. So while we focus mostly on eczema in this interview, she does share some interesting tips on how to keep your skin in top shape. So whether you have a child with eczema or not, you could probably still benefit from listening to this chat. So Abbie talks about the root cause of eczema, why it could be a genetic deficiency in a certain pigment. She talks about the effects of tap water and synthetic chemicals on the skin, how a lot of kids can't tolerate bathing and some solutions. Talks about leaky gut and the connection with the skin and the gut. She talks about food sensitivities in children with eczema, why she likes digestive enzymes, her thoughts on dairy, her thoughts on antibiotics and probiotics, why she loves running the GI stool map test with her clients and what she looks for. He talks about histamine, aloe vera, fungus as a root cause. I ask her about mold in the home, her thoughts on ozone therapy, psoriasis, keratosis pilaris, fat-soluble vitamins, her thoughts on immunoglobulins and why she loves those, sauna or cold bath benefits. And then I ask her listener questions, including cherry angioma solutions, dry skin, tinea versicolor. Can you get eczema from stress? Jock itch, pressure-induced urticaria, tips to treat dermatitis, athlete's foot, dis-hydrosis, correlation with the shots, the jabs, is eczema caused by parasites, and a lot more. So enjoy the show. Here is Abbie Bradford. All right, Abbie Bradford, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much, Matt.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I'm excited to talk about this topic of skin health because it's something that I dealt with my whole childhood and even up until my college years. I remember we were talking briefly before I hit record, like I experienced eczema and it was actually on my inner arm. And I just remember scratching until I bled and it was just really itchy and annoying. And then after the eczema got under control, I had acne come up. So it was like the first 20 years of my life, I was always dealing with skin issues, and it's pretty annoying, but also it kind of screws with your confidence because it's something that people could see. And so there's a whole psychological, emotional aspect to skin issues, right?
Yeah, 100%. And we'll get into this, I'm sure. But especially when this starts super young, you start to get really aware of what's on your skin and how people look at you. And it can start something like kind of in the mental space really early on. So the space of healing this from an early age, which is what I do with kids, I feel is super important for a lot of reasons, but that's a big one.
So how did you get interested in this whole realm of health, the skin specifically?
Yeah, that could be a show in itself, right? But the short version is that I had my own health issues. I had everything from Lyme to skin issues to gut issues to everything in between. And I eventually, I was in practice for quite a few years when I had a kid come to me with eczema. And I had known a lot about gut health, and I was already kind of like this gut health specialist, and that was always an interest of mine. But I couldn't fully get him better. And I knew that I had to, like, he was my spark, and I had to find out what in the world is going on here that I don't know about yet. And he was just this like 2-year-old, like little, like sparkle in his eyes kind of boy. And it's like, I had to help him, which led me down the path of finding how there's this huge, huge gap in the, allopathic space, but also holistic health as well, that these kids don't have answers. So I knew that this was something that was super needed, and that turned out to be incredibly true. Just the more I'm into this, the more I see like how many people are actually suffering. It's not just the kid, it's the entire family. When a kid has eczema, it's everyone in the family that suffers. So that's kind of the short version. And I'm just super passionate about it because there is such a gap in care pretty much anywhere you go.
Did you say you used to be a gut specialist or focused a lot on the gut health?
Yep. Yeah, that was a big piece for me because that was a huge piece that I needed to get well. So my story was that I was on antibiotics for almost a year, which I thought was at that time maybe something that I needed to do for Lyme, which of course I regret. But that was a huge piece of my healing. And as you may know, your audience may know that that is such a key piece in almost every single chronic issue there is, from mental health to skin to literally lung and respiratory and everything. So we know that that is such a foundational piece with the immune system and so many other things. So that's where I started, but it's such a wide variety of things that you can do with gut health. I mean, some people have gut health issues that don't even know, but it's presenting, on their skin, and they're like, "Oh, my gut's fine," when actually it's not. But testing tells us otherwise.
Are you a fan of like the GI stool map test?
The GI map, I think, is one of the better ones for sure. And we can talk about all the different kinds of testing because there are some that parents can go and do on their own that I don't recommend for a variety of reasons. But the GI map test is very robust. Nothing's perfect. There's no perfect test out there. And there are people that say that testing the gut is pointless and there's no way that it's accurate. And there are definitely gaps into what it's able to show us. For sure, there are things that it doesn't show us, but it gives us enough information that it for sure is a game changer in results, in my experience.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, yeah, let's get into the skin and all of the interesting things with it. So, like thinking back to my childhood with developing eczema, I just recorded a show yesterday talking about like vitamin mineral interactions and how mom can pass down deficiencies to the next generation. So you could basically be born deficient in, say, zinc or whatever nutrients. I think that was the case for me. Not to throw my parents under the bus, but I mean, it's like there, there's a lot to health and to get balanced. I mean, it's almost a full-time job, and most people don't go through that work. So any thoughts on that? On like why would a kid have eczema at such an early age, or nutritional deficiencies a big part of that, in your opinion? Or
Yeah, that's the big question, right? Why? These kids can come out literally in the first month of their life, and they can show these things. So how do these perfect little bodies that have barely seen the world, show with such severe skin issues sometimes? And there's definitely several things. So we think about the size of the body of that child, right? And what that means for what their body can handle. So their bucket of what they can handle is so small, just naturally, because they are small. The other thing is that genetics can determine that bucket size as well. So say you've got the same age of two different children. Based on genetics, they maybe have different size buckets of what they can handle. So that's one piece. The other piece is that absolutely what mom has, toxicity wise, nutrient deficiencies, gut health, overgrowths, not enough good bacteria, all of that stuff is passed down to baby. There's actually some recent research. We used to think dad was out of the picture, right? It was like, oh, it doesn't matter. Dad can do whatever he wants. It's no big deal. But we actually know now, somehow, through the DNA that's given, in the birthing process or in the conception process, his gut health, his genetics, of course, but his microbiome in his gut has a lot more to do with what baby ends up with than we ever used to think. So we used to think that it's all on mom. Mom's body has to be perfect in order for the baby to be perfect. And that's not the case. We never want to guilt or shame mom into what happened in the past anyways. But all of those things go into what is passed on. And so when we think about, like, most people in the holistic space know that being born vaginally is optimal. Being breastfed is optimal. And those are because that stuff is still being passed on in a good way to the child. So they get this inoculation when they go through the birth canal. And it's not like their gut microbiome, which is all of those like good and maybe some bad bacterial balance in their gut. They don't just get that out of nowhere. It doesn't just appear. They get it from their parents. And a lot of it does come from mom. So we know that there are these different kind of under the iceberg reasons why eczema is showing on the surface, and absolutely nutrient deficiencies and all the other stuff I just said is part of that.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that it's an internal issue. The internal environment is showing on the skin, but there are some actual skin things going on, of course. So there is a particular um, pigment called filaggrin, which is really important for eczema, which there can be this genetic deficiency in filaggrin, which helps the skin to be a little bit more elastic and pliable, but also protects the skin heavily and helps the skin like regenerate and just be healthy in general. So we know that that can be a genetic piece, but we know that kids can have genes for eczema and never present with eczema for one. So we know that's just a small piece of it. The other piece is that we've heard, I'm sure those listening in the holistic space know what leaky gut is. So these kids can also have leaky skin. So the allergens that are in the environment, which could be anything, it could be anything from like trees to mold, dander, food, all kinds of stuff, they can actually get through the skin into the immune system. So they can actually have these sort of reactions that aren't even based on them ingesting something. So the skin is really important because it has a barrier. I mean, think about the skin being our largest organ. It is our largest organ. So if that has a leaky barrier, an insufficient barrier, you are literally at the wits of anything in the environment. You don't have much of a protection. The immune system goes crazy from that. So we need that sort of barrier in order to really distinguish what is foreign and what is ours. And that is what the messaging that gets a little bit messed up with eczema, and why these kids can sometimes have massive, massive reactions to what seems like life in general.
Wow, that's fascinating. Yeah, because usually for stuff to get into our system, into our blood, infections, it has to get through the mucous membranes, right? Like in our throat or in our intestines. But yeah, if it's coming right through the skin, that's a huge surface area of stuff to enter. So
Yeah, exactly.
pretty,
And that's why it becomes this thing where it can get to a point where the parents feel like they don't want to take their kids out of the house. They don't want to introduce them to anything, any new, even like topical product, it seems like they can react to, because really their immune system at the root of this, it's an immune system imbalance. And so it becomes so reactive to pretty much everything. It seems like it doesn't have to get that severe, but it can. And that's when we really have to help them with the internal environment and the external environment a little bit. It's more the internal, but we still have some skin stuff that we can do that can help.
what role do you think tap water, like municipal tap water, plays? Because I feel like personally that was a big part of my story. You know, super soaker fights in the street with my friends, getting sprayed with tap water, and then going to the chlorinated pool and taking a chlorinated shower and all the chemical concoctions. I mean, not only chlorine, but the acidic form of fluoride in the shower, and I mean, just all of the chemical concoctions that were injected into the city water. I feel like I just was megadosing that for the first couple decades of my life, and it definitely aggravated my acne and eczema, and my skin would get red every time after going in the jacuzzi or pool or a shower. So, what are your thoughts on the impacts of tap water?
Yeah, it's huge. It's one of those things that we think about, what is the largest amount of quantity that we're consuming? It's probably water, right?
Yep.
And because we're getting that internally, we're drinking it, we're showering in it, we're playing in it. It's all these things. So it is a huge source. And as we know, all kinds of stuff is in the tap water. And it doesn't matter if you're in the city, if you have a well, wells are not exempt from those kinds of things either, because you could be in an area where there's a lot of farm runoff, there's a lot of agricultural chemicals, of course, that can get into this water. So no one's necessarily exempt, and you shouldn't assume that because your water comes straight from the ground and the city doesn't mess with it, that it's perfect, because it definitely is not the case. I'm sure you've talked about that. So we know with these kids, we talked about their bucket, right? They've got this bucket that's just overflowing. They've got these gut infections, possibly. They might have toxins that they can't deal with. They've got all these different things. And so then we add in this tap water issue and these chemicals that are getting through the skin because there's a leaky skin barrier, and maybe they're ingesting it too, who knows? So those things are going into that bucket of what these kids are having to deal with. And it's just one more thing. So absolutely, that is one of the places I start with kids, is making sure that they either have a bath filter, they have a shower filter, of course, drinking water filter is super paramount. So all of those things are really important to start to unload the bucket of what these kids are dealing with.
Mm. Yeah, that's kind of overwhelming for a lot of people because most of the, I sell filters and I've been talking about them for over 10 years. And a lot of people come to me and say, what's the best whole house filter? And I notice that's the biggest like misconception or strategy that people have about water filtration. Oh, just put something on the whole house. But usually to get a decent one, you're looking at about $10,000, which if you want to spend that, awesome. Otherwise, it's, kitchen filter under the kitchen sink for drinking, a shower filter, like you said, maybe a bath filter. Although I don't find many of those are effective, but maybe I'll find one that works. But yeah, it can be kind of overwhelming, I think, for families to get into that world because all the marketing and you have to sift through and what's good, what's not.
For sure. Yeah. There's, of course, you're in the business of it.
Yeah.
You've done the research, and there's definitely the fact that they're not all created equal. So we start, at least in my program, when I work with kids, we start small, because to tell someone to go, like you said, buy a $10,000 whole house filter, probably not that doable on top of everything else that I would like them to do to get their kids well. So we start small. And I do believe that even a little bath filter has some significance, right? It's better than nothing, and you can start there. Would we also like to have other filters? Absolutely. So hopefully maybe you can come out with a bath filter that helps everyone. I know you have a shower one, but a lot of these kiddos that we're working with aren't doing showers yet. But some kids,
Yeah.
they can't even tolerate a lot of bathing and water anyways, because their skin is so sensitive to this. And once it gets wet and it dries, and it exacerbates that dryness. So a lot of these kids, I just tell the parents, don't even bathe them very often. And I know that's weird because we're in this kind of sterile world, right? It's like, oh no, they're dirty. They can't have dirt on them. They have to be clean. And we know that using a bunch of soap all the time is not good for them either, because that really creates more of this leaky skin barrier. And what I mean by that is we need these oils in our skin. We need this stuff to help to create that healthy barrier again. And if every day we're soaping down and we're getting rid of this stuff, that doesn't help, especially in these kids. But even for adults, I recommend that you only wash your pits and your groin, essentially, maybe your feet, because you want these healthy microbes and fatty acids and things on the skin. So most kids that have eczema, I tell them, bathe the least amount possible. Don't use soap. And really little kids, like under 2 years of age, they don't really even need soap. Water does the job. So we don't have to get into like all these other products, although there are some that are created a little bit better that aren't true soap, where they're not going to disrupt that skin barrier as much. But yeah, that kind of was a tangent off of water, but that's really important for kids, because I think sometimes parents are like, get into this like, we gotta have to bathe them every single night. That's not actually true, or maybe healthy for them.
It's a great point. Yeah. Yeah. I've been using tallow based soap for the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. And that feels really gentle on my skin. But yeah, I do that same thing, only groin and pits and feet. And that's it. It just feels like that's all I need. So
Yeah, exactly. And most people don't notice the difference. You don't feel super gross if you do that. Like the water will wash away the things that you don't need.
yep. Yeah. Well, I guess a good next point is so what causes a leaky skin barrier? I know we talked about a lot of the things at the start with deficiencies, genetic passing down. Are there any other big things we didn't talk about yet that contribute to that?
To the skin barrier, or do you mean eczema in general?
I guess the skin barrier weakening. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's mostly a genetic thing going on, but like I said, that's just it is a small piece. I don't want people to feel
Mm.
like you have the genetics and you're doomed to have this problem because that's not the case. So there is a genetic piece with that skin barrier, but like I said, we can have that genetic piece and not have eczema. So what's the difference? And maybe we can talk about that.
Let's do it. Yeah. So what is the difference?
So, of course, we have to go to the other leaky part, which is the gut. And so the gut is super important because when there is leaky gut, we've got essentially this very thin membrane, which is supposed to be keeping things in the actual digestive system that shouldn't be anywhere else from getting into the systemic circulation. And that's super important because what happens is if you get undigested food particles or these bacteria, yeast, parasites, whatever that is maybe not supposed to be there or maybe only supposed to be in the gut, and that comes through that membrane into the systemic circulation, what lives right there in the blood is the whole rest of the immune system and all kinds of things that can start to make the immune system go crazy. So, when these things are not supposed to be in the systemic circulation, the immune system immediately sees that as a red flag. And it's like, red alert, red alert. There's things here that shouldn't be here. And that's a natural, normal part of the immune system. It's its job. So when we talk about things like histamine and these other cytokines, not to get too nerdy, but these are things that are part of a healthy, normal inflammatory response in the immune system. Where we go wrong is where it happens every day, every meal, every time we ingest something, and the body just can't handle that. And it's a chronic high alert system all the time. So these kids usually are very reactive to food. It can be a true food allergy where like their IgE antibodies are very high. Sometimes nothing shows on allergy testing. It's more of a sensitivity, but they're still very sensitive to certain foods. So the number one food sensitivity we see by far in eczema kiddos is dairy. And I don't want to demonize dairy because I think there can be some healthy forms of dairy, but in these kids, we see the immune system go crazy over dairy, number one overall. And so the immune system is seeing, let me back up for a second. So the reason for part of this can be because their actual chemical digestion is not working very well. The actual breaking down of the food particles to get lower into the digestive system is not working very well. And if they're breastfed, if they're very young and they're breastfed, they're getting a pre-digested food essentially. But maybe mom has food sensitivities. Maybe mom has a leaky gut. She's reacting to these foods as well. And all of that's coming through the breast milk. So, in young children that are breastfed, either exclusively or partially, we want to be thinking about all areas of their food, and that includes mom. So, in older children who are not breastfed, we're thinking specifically about really needing to help their digestion as well. So, we do give kids digestive enzymes. When I test kids, I see all the time their enzymes aren't great, their stool has too much fat in it, and that kind of thing. And we know that there should be no fat in a kid's stool. And so they are not digesting very well. So we start up north in the digestive process. So that's way up north. We work our way down thinking about these different overgrowths now that can cause this leaky gut. So we're thinking about overgrowths of different bacteria and parasites and yeast. Now, yeast should be there in small amounts. When it gets overgrown, it creates massive issues. It creates a very hostile environment that acts pathogenic. So this is a big problem. This is a big underlying cause of cradle cap. You'll see a lot of babies with cradle cap. That is a lot of yeast on the skin. There can also be an issue where there's like a separate issue where it starts to actually colonize and grow on the skin. So that's a separate issue as well, but usually still an underpinning in gut health. So we've got all these things that are in the gut that are just either they shouldn't be there at all or there's too much of them. And this starts to create a toxic environment. This comes through that leaky barrier into the systemic circulation and eventually out the skin. So
Wow.
that was a lot.
No, that's great. I wanted to circle back to dairy because that's something I have a lot of experience with in relationship to skin. And I've even had breakouts from raw dairy. And it was a brand you could buy in the grocery stores in Southern California when I used to live there. And I think it was what is it, Jersey cow milk, and I seem to do well on Guernsey. Like Guernsey cow milk does not make me break out in acne. So, do you find with kids you worked with that playing around with raw versus pasteurized and A1 versus A2 and Jersey versus Guernsey and all of these little details, do you find that matters and you could sometimes find one that works for them and that maybe actually helps to reverse their skin conditions?
So when kids are in the beginning stages of this, we're really trying to reduce the total amount of inflammation that's happening on the skin. We don't really want to have any dairy coming in at all because at that point, they're just very reactive and it doesn't really matter if it's A1 or A2, if it's cow or goat or sheep,
Mhm.
it doesn't really matter. Even ghee, ghee is technically like the least allergenic because it's just pure fat, but we still see that can have an issue. So once we get the gut into a better place, more balanced, we've got the inflammation under control a little bit better. When we start to introduce dairy, absolutely, we want to be thinking about highest quality, least allergenic. That would be ghee and then A2. So definitely, it makes a difference because the protein is very different. And for some reason, that protein in A1 milk, especially when it's kind of conventionally raised, we know that that is for sure the biggest potential for them to react. So there's an argument that no one should be eating conventional A1 dairy. It's like not the best. I still think that we can tolerate it and we can get these kids to a point where they can tolerate it once we get all the other things in balance. But definitely in the beginning, that's the first thing you want to think about removing. And we think about, a lot of parents like, well, how are they going to get calcium? How are they going to get that? It's really a non-issue. We don't see that these kids, or vitamin D, we don't see that these kids are super deficient from not having dairy in their diet. And actually, there's an argument that it's totally unnecessary in their diet at all, at least until a certain age. The other thing that dairy does is it creates a mucus in the body. And we know that that can be really inflammatory for these kids because they're already in an inflamed state that is very damp. So when we talk about Chinese medicine and dampness, it creates, or the dairy definitely contributes to that dampness that's already going on in the body. So dampness is kind of like just what you would think about like, like a damp cloth, a damp room. It's got this moisture, it's got this like the opposite of dry, right? So we don't want to continue to put damp things in the body. And those are things like peanuts, peanut butter, dairy, sugar. Those are all contributing to this dampness. So those are the things that we definitely want to stay away from for multiple reasons.
That's funny because you named all the, I mean, peanuts, well, peanut butter, dairy, and sugar kind of sum up my childhood. I ate a significant amount of those three.
I think
I
all
went,
of us, especially in the 90s, are.
oh, yeah, pillowcases for Halloween. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you ever take the kill approach? Because I know over the years, a lot of moms have asked me, do you recommend parasite cleanses for kids? And I know a lot of people, even in the health community, will go the targeted antibiotic approach, which I'm open to if there's like a rebuilding process. And I think they do have, some of them do have benefits very short term acutely. But just your thoughts on kind of the kill approach. You mentioned like bacteria, yeast, and
Mhm.
parasites.
It's definitely something that can be a very effective part of a protocol. It really depends. So there's this notion in the eczema space that everyone needs to take a probiotic. If you go down the holistic rabbit hole, it's like, oh, eczema, take a probiotic. That may be beneficial. I only see about 10 to 15% of kids really needing a probiotic. Now, there are times for sure, like mom got antibiotics during labor. She got antibiotics maybe during pregnancy. Maybe she's had a history of a lot of antibiotics, and maybe she needs, her and baby both need probiotics. More of the time, I see that overgrowths are the issue. And that does require a eradication slash kill approach. Now, that is for a certain amount of time. It is not long. We're not doing these like crazy things. We're not using like really strong things like maybe oregano oil. I don't do that with kids because kids are so resilient that we don't need these crazy strong approaches. Now, we do need them to be robust. The protocols need to be robust. And what I mean by that is that we don't just go in and kill stuff. If you go in and give a kid an antimicrobial, a lot of times when they have eczema, they are not going to do well. They are going to flare like crazy. So I don't want people going out there and like getting these, there are different things like the BioRay line of kids has Happy. They find out about this and they go get them Happy. Please do not give your kid that. There is a systematic approach that we need to set their body up to be able to kill. So that means that we have to support their immune system, support their histamine response, give them digestive support so they're breaking down their food properly, give them detoxification support so that when we go in and we do kill some stuff, it's not going to cause a huge flare. They can still flare, but we want to set their bodies up the absolute best possible so that when these things die, because there's a die-off reaction always, these bugs carry toxins and all kinds of stuff that their body has to deal with. We don't want to overload that bucket that's already overloaded. They're not going to do well. So this is where it gets a little bit complex, and it's very difficult for parents to do this stuff on their own because naturally they don't have this kind of knowledge. And I think a lot of parents feel like they need to be able to do this on their own. It's like, this is very complex. I've learned from many mentors, been in a lot of schooling to be able to learn this kind of stuff because it is not a one size fits all. There's not one protocol, one product, one topical, one supplement that works for everyone. And it's because we have to have this systematic, robust approach, and we have to really make it individualized. And I know that that's annoying to people because they just want the answer, the one thing that's going to get them better. And of course, in the holistic space in general, that's probably a theme. It's like, it's never one thing. But we need to be able to really support their bodies in a very robust way. And this is where I see a lot of kids will go to like a chiropractor or someone, or even maybe a naturopath, and maybe they do run a GI map test and they just go to the kill approach. Not gonna work well. Even if you get the testing, you really need someone that knows how to do that interpretation properly to make a proper protocol that's going to work and not going to make everything worse.
It's interesting because you said, to set up to support the detox, immune, digestive system. It's kind of the same philosophy with heavy metal detox with, getting enough zinc and all the nutrients in vitamin E, vitamin C to have basically the strength to detoxify heavy metals. So you mentioned the stool map test. Do you often, like, what's the starting point with supporting those systems in kids? Do you have them tested for deficiencies or metals or?
We don't do a lot of heavy metal testing with kids just because we really aren't going to be doing a lot of direct heavy metal cleansing as well. That's an advanced approach that I probably wouldn't do with a young child. We do support their systems and use certain gentle things like chlorella and things like that that will naturally detoxify in a very safe way for these kids. As far as testing, I usually almost always do a GI map stool test just because, like I said, it could be very different underlying cause for the same even sibling in a family. It's like they're from the same family. They actually don't always have the same presentation. So I like to use the stool testing so we're not guessing and we have the most information possible. The things that we use to help with the eczema also just help all these other underlying root causes that you mentioned as well. Not every kid has metals as as a main issue. Some probably do. Like I said, kids are so resilient. We don't treat them the same as adults. We often are supporting their body in a way that is allowing the body to do the process on its own as much as possible because their organs are brand new, right? Like they're not under this like attack for many years of all this oxidative stress and all these other things going on. And so they have a level of resilience that we can work with. That's actually why I love working with kids because even though it's difficult because their bodies are small, it ends up being a really beautiful process because we just bring that natural resilience out and it ends up working out really well.
That's awesome. In the stool map test, do you see common trends in a lot of clients where 80% of them have something deficient or overgrown? I know recently, last year or two, there was like an acromantia craze.
Yeah, and there's like a probiotic specifically that you can give, and it is important. So when we look at the stool test and we look at their good bacteria, there's two main ones that can almost confirm that there's leaky gut going on. And this is nothing's diagnostic or anything like that. we already know that there's some level of leaky gut going on because they have eczema. But Akkermansia is one of them. The other one is called Faecalibacterium. When those two are not detected at all on the test, we know that their own natural ability to heal their own gut is pretty low because those two play very key roles in the mucus layer. If they don't have a proper mucus layer, there's likely leaky gut going on. As far as good bacteria, it's all over the board. There's not really one pattern. Some kids have way too much bacteria. Some have too much and too little of different strains. Some have not enough. And that's why there's no guessing really. When it comes to the overgrowth, it's very, very commonly strep and staph. That's very common to see those overgrown. Kids with eczema have a lot of issues with staph in general because it colonizes on the skin. We all have some level of Staph aureus on the skin, but because their pH of their skin is a little bit too alkaline, it allows the overgrowth of these things like staph, because when the skin is properly acidic, the skin, it doesn't allow things to overgrow. Not every kid with eczema has an issue with topical staph, but many, many do. And a lot of times they'll see that they're kind of this yellow, crusty, sometimes weeping, oozing. That's usually staph, and you want to use something topical like rosemary hydrosol, sometimes colloidal silver, sometimes HOCl. Those things all help to acidify the skin. Apple cider vinegar in a bath can help to acidify the skin. Back to the gut, the other things that we see that are overgrown a lot, one particular one is Klebsiella, which is a high histamine producer. So this is when kids are like crazy itchy, and they can be itchy regardless, but that particular one really can contribute to the amount of histamine in the body. So we get histamine from 3 different places. We can get it from food. Foods naturally can have histamine. Our own immune system can produce it in response to things. And then we've got these bugs that also can produce it. So if you've got all 3 of those kind of overloaded in the body, the kid's going to be so crazy itchy. It's also going to affect their sleep. They won't sleep well. They get irritated. In adults, it causes anxiety. In kids, it causes this temperament change and a sleep issue. And they're just not always their calm selves. So a lot of times we get kids better. Parents are like, oh my gosh, I have a different kid. But Klebsiella is a big one that we see overgrown. There's a couple other ones that we can see. Pseudomonas and Enterococcus are big ones that really contribute to more severe food sensitivities. We don't treat the testing though. I don't want to say that like, oh, we're going to go after Klebsiella with this particular thing. In general, we're looking for patterns. We're looking for, is this an inflammatory pattern? Is this an insufficiency pattern? They don't have enough of the good things to keep gut health intact. So that's where like the clinician part of me comes in and is like, I tell the parents, because I talk to so many on the phone, and I'm like, it's okay that you don't know this stuff. I know that you feel responsible, and I know that you feel guilty that you haven't gotten them well, but it's actually not your responsibility because it's so stinking complex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know growing up, my mom used aloe vera on me. We had aloe vera plants in my backyard in San Diego, and she would chop them off, cut the leaf and then rub it on my, inner elbow and my arm. And it was instant relief. Like it would take away the need to itch and just bring so much soothing to where I could sleep. And it was also great when I got sunburned numerous times growing up. But do you think that was a good kind of approach as a temporary if someone has aloe vera plants? Uh,
Yeah,
is there a benefit
100%.
there?
Yep,
Mhm.
100%. Aloe is one of the best natural things that we have that we can do, in pure aloe. So none of that like, fake green stuff in the tube. So you can get some stuff that's natural, but the plant itself is amazing. And you can literally, like you said, just cut it in half, rub it on the skin. It's very naturally, um, it just gives the cooling effect that a lot of eczema needs. So usually these kids run really hot, they're very inflamed. Everything is kind of this like red inflammation. I mean, even internally and externally. So aloe provides that cooling, and that can be really helpful because think about even a wound. Like you put aloe on a wound, it's going to help heal. Eczema definitely is a wound of sorts, and that can be really great in addition to some other things too.
What about internally? Like I had one of my first shows was a guy at a company sells fresh frozen aloe vera. So it's shipped in like frozen jugs to your house, and it's the inner leaf and, not just room temperature health food store stuff, but like the real deal.
Mhm.
Have you ever seen people benefit from that or use that for eczema? Just because I know it's incredible for the gut health, and there's like ace mannan is the active ingredient in it that has a lot of benefits.
Yeah, aloe is an amazing thing internally. I don't use it internally with kids. For one, it doesn't taste good. They don't like it. Two, though, it can act as a laxative. Certain parts of the plant can have a laxative effect. It's just not something that I typically do with kids. Sometimes we do use Ace Mannan. It's quite expensive. It's typically not my first go-to, but I get a lot of kids come into our program and they're already on it because they heard online that, oh, it was like the number one thing that got my kid well. And it definitely helps to heal the gut. It has gut healing properties that are quite amazing. It's not the only thing. Remember that robust protocol we were talking about? It's just one piece that can be really helpful, but aloe itself has a very healing, I guess, property to it, just like on the outside, internally on the gut lining as well. But that Ace Mannan, you're right, it is a concentration and it comes in a capsule, and parents, they can open it up and put it on a little bit of food, and it definitely can make a difference. It is that gut healing piece. But if they also have these overgrowth and different things, we want to be using things in addition to that, but it can be very helpful.
Mm, awesome. Is there a fungal component? Because that's often what I've heard with acne. Like when I was getting into natural health and I was trying to get to the root of my lifelong acne, a lot of the stuff I heard from raw vegan educators and even just other educators in the natural health realm were, it's a deep rooted fungal infection, and either using antifungals, oregano's one, or going keto, go very low carb or whatever. And what actually benefited me was just increasing my enzymes. I got into green vegetable juicing, and I think I'd just never gotten that many enzymes in my body before. And so my skin was just glowing, even just from store-bought organic produce, which is I don't recommend as a true you know healing protocol. But for me back then, not knowing much, it actually completely changed my skin. Uh,
Yeah,
so
there's something to that for sure, because if you think about what we talked about, if the food is not getting
mhm,
digested properly, that causes a massive amount of inflammation. So if you're getting more enzymes and you're digesting better, that alone is able to start the healing process. The body needs to be able to not only get the nutrients from your food, but not have these undigested particles causing inflammation later down in the gut tract. So that's a big thing. As far as fungus is a huge underlying cause of eczema. It is not the only cause and is not everyone's cause of eczema, just like it's not the only cause of acne. But for me, I did get acne after doing pretty bad acne, cystic, after doing the year of antibiotics that I did for Lyme. And it took me forever to find out what it was causing or like why it was doing that. And I finally did like a 60 days super strict, no vinegar, no nothing that fed yeast. My acne was gone like that. I mean, I never returned. So I know that acne has a big fungal piece, eczema has a big fungal piece. It can also be bacteria. It can also just be bacteria. It's difficult because on testing, fungus does not always show up. It's very difficult to detect fungus in a stool test just based on the nature of once fungus gets out of the body and all these different things. So when we don't see it come up on a stool test, it's always on the back of my mind. Do we need to address some fungal piece? The nice thing about herbs is that some of them that are antibacterial are also antifungal. So, we can use these different things that have kind of a 1-2 approach. Some kids also need a little bit of like biofilm work or a little bit deeper targeted antifungal work. We always are kind of monitoring how they're doing and seeing, do we need to go and look at this fungal piece? Also, I do a history of mom. If mom's had a lot of UTIs in the past, if she's had a lot of yeast infections herself, either like, skin or toenail fungus or that kind of stuff, instantly I know that fungus is an issue. Also, if mom has had a significant history of antibiotics, we know that fungus is likely an issue. It doesn't always show in the way that Like, if it's something is on the skin, like mom gets a fungal infection on the skin, it's very obvious. Like at that point, it's pretty severe. If you get toenail fungus, it's systemic in your body. It's pretty severe. So we don't always get like really obvious signs from mom, but there are those other more subtle signs. And I do notice as well that eczema is not always in the first child, maybe not even in the second child. I've seen women that have 4 children, it didn't show up until the fourth child. So, my hypothesis is that what we know about yeast is that the progesterone that is very high in pregnancy can contribute to an overgrowth of yeast. So, if they already are tipped towards having a yeast fungal issue, that progesterone can really, really feed that yeast issue. And with each subsequent pregnancy, it gets worse and worse and worse. So by the time we get to child 3 or 4, usually that's kind of a yeast issue. It can be bacterial as well, but I'm really thinking about yeast at that point. So I guess that's kind of a tip if for parents that are like, well, I had, my first kid was totally fine, or my second kid had it really mild and then they grew out of it. Why is this one so bad? That could be a big reason why.
Wow. I've also heard the theory that with each child that mom has, it takes a certain percentage of her minerals and I don't know, probably vitamins to some degree. And so if you go to, having 4 or 5 kids, each one, you're getting more and more depleted if, she's not testing and on top of her vitamin and mineral balance.
Yeah, oh,
So,
absolutely. That's for sure part of it too. And how many moms really wait the full 18 months
mhm.
for their body to recover? A lot of them don't. And a lot of them stop taking, different things to replenish themselves afterwards because they're, especially if you're breastfeeding, you should absolutely still be taking some nutrients to replenish what you've lost. I think that the article just came out recently that within like the Western medical community that actually acknowledged how much it takes a toll on mom's body. Like they actually acknowledged like, holy cow, this is like the biggest ask of your body that you could ever have. Like we've known that, of course, but they finally acknowledged it that it is a lot. So give your body time to recover and absolutely eat the most nutrient dense diet. Think about supplementing some certain key vitamins as well. I mean, I think just good prenatals are good. Good enough, with your diet, but absolutely that's a key piece.
Have you ever seen people move to a new home and they think that the mold, moldy environment was contributing to their child's eczema, and just getting into a new home resolved a large portion of it? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, it happens, I would say, a good amount of time. And the mold awareness is becoming more and more. So we see now that there's these things online, especially when they go down the rabbit hole, like, oh, eczema and mold. And it definitely can be something that is contributing. I have seen where just getting air purifiers cleared their skin better than anything else. I've seen where, they got their HVAC cleaned out, the ducts cleaned out, and their skin cleared almost 100%. So we know that this environmental piece is huge and it doesn't affect everyone in the home the same. So it can drive us a little crazy, like feeling like this one person is highly affected and everyone else isn't. And that's probably not the case. But yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it resolves on its own. Sometimes their body, their gut, and all that needs a little bit of help to get the rest of that out. And if they're breastfeeding, then we help mom a little bit too with some binders and things to help get those mycotoxins out because we know they can go through the milk.
Hmm. Uh, I'm into so many different therapies, and one of the ones that I think has great application is ozone for just so many things used correctly. And I mean, you could put the gas in your ears, you could drink ozonated water, which are probably two of the more gentle ways instead of going rectal or, ozone IV or whatever. Have you ever seen people benefit from doing different types of ozone therapy, even just drinking the water or using the gas different
I do
ways?
have an ozone machine myself that I have experimented with. I think that when people have like mold especially or a lot of histamine issues, putting ozone in there is kind of like putting a bomb in for a lot of these people. And if their detox pathways are not open, it is not pretty. So when there's like, because we were just talking about mold, if that's an issue, usually the immune system is on high alert. So we've got lots of histamine in these pro-inflammatory cytokines that are just kind of out of control, that's a form of oxidative stress. And so if you add more ozone, which is another form of oxidative stress, it can be too much for the body. There's not enough antioxidant repair happening. They feel like crap. They can't get these processed. I mean, it's basically just kind of dumping more onto what the body already has to deal with. Absolutely, I think there's a time and place for ozone. I think rectal and ear insufflation can be a little bit more gentle. IV is one of those that's like, you really have to do some work first before you just go and do that. But I think that ozone can have a place. Again, a piece of the protocol, a piece of the puzzle. You can't just like do that and do nothing else. You've got to support the other areas. But I mean, nothing is better at getting rid of some of these systemic infections than ozone in a lot of ways.
Behind me, I have a 311 nanometer UV light. I know a lot of people use like the spur tea, and then some people just say go out in the sun at specific times of day. But there was a study on the narrowband UV light therapy helping with psoriasis. And I know UV has really interesting effects on the skin, and also red light therapy, which I've been using like, I don't know, 8 years now or a long time. Have you seen kids benefit from getting either red and or targeted UV light therapy in?
So for eczema, not so much. So
Mm.
eczema is not a true autoimmune skin condition like, say, psoriasis is. So eczema tends to be exacerbated by heat. So a lot of times these kids go out into the sun, they're out there a little bit too long, and they can break out actually, especially if they're really sweaty, then it contributes to that dampness we were talking about on the skin, and it can exacerbate. Of course, we want kids to be getting sunlight, but we need to monitor that so they don't get too much, they get a little bit of a break, because it definitely can contribute to this inflammation level that's already rising, right? They've already got so much heat in their body. More heat a lot of times is not good. There's a subset of eczema people that really do well in the summer, and winter it flares up. There's another subset that is the opposite.
Wow.
Winter, it's the best. Summer, it flares up. So that again is kind of a puzzle piece to me that makes sense. Say if we have a lot of this damp heat, which usually is more of a fungal piece, usually they'll get in the creases of their elbows, backs of their knees, kind of like the folds of their skin a little bit. Usually that's more to do with fungus than anything. And that's when that heat, that dampness really exacerbates. When we talk about psoriasis, that is a autoimmune condition on the surface of the skin that the skin is essentially just creating way too many skin cells. So when they go out in the sun actually calms that process. And usually people with psoriasis do a lot better because their skin cells are no longer kind of this out of control rate being produced. And the sun, it just feels really soothing. So very different. There's underlying causes that overlap between the two things, but sun is one of those things that's very different for those two conditions.
That's fascinating because I know there's a huge trend, and I'm not going to demonize sunlight here, but I think there's like this weird thing on social media where it goes to the extreme of the sun cures everything, and grounding combined with the sunlight cures everything, and all your health issues will go away if you sunbathe or just get a daily dose of sun. But it's really fascinating that you said a lot of kids can get a flare up or could exacerbate their eczema with that heat, which is really interesting. Which brings me to another idea. Cold plunging is really popular, and you probably don't want to throw your kid in a 55-degree tub. But have you ever seen parents go to that degree and just see if that helps their skin, just getting small doses of cold, or even just topically? I know at clinics you can do, I think they usually use it for cellulite reduction, right? But the topical like cold application.
That's not something that usually is helpful for eczema, at least not that I've seen, and definitely not. I mean, kids don't know how to regulate their nervous system or their breathing, so throwing them in some sort of cold waters is would probably do more harm than good. For adults, though, I think there can be some benefit in other areas of the body. I don't see that eczema is like that's a huge one. I don't really have much experience with that because usually we're trying to stay out of a lot of water with eczema. Um, so we don't go to a lot of those things. If we do use water therapeutically, it's more to use like dead sea salt therapy or apple cider vinegar therapy or something like that. So yeah, I wouldn't say that cold does a whole lot for the skin. Sometimes though, if someone is really in that high heat production, like internally, it can help to cool them down. But yeah, that would probably be more for adults.
Mm. What about magnesium? You mentioned sea salt and apple cider vinegar. I've been using magnesium topically and used to use the sprays, and then I realized, you could get a lot more into the bath. And there's chloride and then sulfur, which there's a deep relationship with sulfur in the skin. Have you seen kids benefit from even feet soaks in magnesium or just to raise their levels?
Yeah, with kids, we tend to, and we can absolutely do that, like a foot soak or a full like soak with magnesium chloride. So
Mhm.
when we use dead sea salt to really help the skin kind of get into a more acidic state or just kind of wash away the outer layers. When we use magnesium, it's more like topically, magnesium chloride can it kind of can create that crust on your skin, and that isn't always really helpful. It can also burn their skin, so we try to stay away from that. I do love magnesium sulfate in the way that it gives the body the sulfur. It helps detoxification. It helps to move things. It doesn't help topically though. So we got to be careful with these kids that have really inflamed skin because a lot of times those things will really burn them. And, but once their skin's in a better place, I think it's great to do those kinds of things for sure.
Missing pieces for me for skin health seem to be, well, I think just protein, because I was like plant-based for most of my life. So just eating animal foods really helped uh, with reducing with acne and rashes. But I'm curious your thoughts on like largely vitamin A, which I know there's like a really deep, they use Accutane for acne, and just vitamin A is involved in so many processes um, in the skin, or vitamin E, which are in skincare products, and ascorbic acid, vitamin C. Any thoughts on those three? Do you think those are commonly deficient in? Because I know even dealing with infections, right? Like you mentioned, the oxidative stress is going to burn through some of those antioxidants.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most people can benefit from those in general, just because they're things, especially say fat soluble vitamin A is something that we just don't get a lot of in our diet. So if we talk about something like KP, keratosis pilaris, and that is something that a lot of people have no idea what's causing it. And it's just kind of these like bumps on the back of their skin. It's like chicken skin, a lot of people say. That can be something that is contributing to or has a root cause of vitamin A deficiency. So, vitamin A, whenever we see anything like that on the skin, that usually has some sort of connection. The other thing, too, though, with KP, just real quick, is that there's usually a food sensitivity at play. So, a lot of times people take gluten out of their diet, like conventional gluten goes away. But also vitamin A, fat soluble vitamin A can really help. With these kids, when we think about their like some of the deficiencies, they can have true deficiencies and C, D, even zinc a little bit too, because the skin needs a lot of zinc to heal. Vitamin C is really needed for the skin to heal. It turns into collagen, at least that's one of the cofactors of collagen. So absolutely it can be helpful. Is it the thing that moves the needle the most? I don't see that. But it is important to think about nutrient deficiencies, especially as we talked about when these kids are, second, third, fourth child, and mom maybe wasn't aware of how to give her body those nutrients. Absolutely, these things can be helpful. So definitely in maintenance, at the very least, we're thinking about being able to replenish the nutrients. A lot of times we're putting these kids, especially on some robust gut protocols, so we don't want to give them 10 different things at once, but it absolutely is important. And besides food, because that food just doesn't have what we need to have in it, it's important to give these kids a varied diet as much as possible, for adults too, to have a varied diet. But we sometimes supplementation is just absolutely necessary.
Yeah, you mentioned like cutting out dairy, at least for temporarily, cutting out gluten. And I definitely think as a temporary strategy, like restricting certain foods or food groups has a benefit. But with that comes missing out on certain nutrients, right? And I agree with you earlier, what you said about calcium. I do think it's overrated. And I think magnesium's way more important. I mean, calcium's essential and we need it, but it's, yeah, it's stored in the body. And I
And
don't
we get
know.
it from other areas, and sometimes we get too much of it, like
Mhm.
from certain water sources and things
Yep.
like that.
Water's a huge one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
one thing I should say
Yeah.
about food, though, is that the point is not to demonize food, because food is
Mhm.
not the actual problem. Like, if we're taking out
Mhm.
dairy, we're taking out gluten, we're not demonizing those foods necessarily. Foods, and I mean, it can be so many other things. It can be things that are, deemed healthy
Mhm.
that these kids are reacting to. And I say kids a lot because that's who I work with, but I mean a lot of, these can be adults as well. But the point is that when the gut is in a state that it is wounded, it is kind of like this open wound. If you put these foods that tend to be a little bit inflammatory on a wound, that wound is going to say ouch, And so we need to, in order to get that inflammation down as much as possible, we do need to temporarily cut out what I call the top five. So that would be gluten, dairy, eggs, peanuts, and soy. And that is not forever. That is a period of time that we are, like I said, getting down that inflammation so that we can get their body into a state that can heal, and then we can slowly reintroduce those. If someone has a true food allergy, like an IgE allergy to something, that is a little bit more difficult to heal, but it is absolutely possible. So I just want to make sure that we get across the point that we don't want to be taking out all these different foods, because you can go down the rabbit hole of taking out high histamine foods and high salicylate foods. And sometimes that is necessary, but we don't start there and we don't stay there for very long.
Yeah, because then you're just at the carnivore diet, right? Which,
Yeah, and no fiber. Yeah, exactly.
I- do you think the food colorings and just all the chemicals that a kid would be exposed to at school or at their friend's house? I mean, I just remember me growing up, and I can't even imagine the Frankenstein concoctions that I consumed unknowingly of red dye and all the colored sodas. And I mean, the sugar and the caffeine were probably the best part of those sodas, but then it had all this other crap with it. And I think that actually aggravated my skin stuff more than the sugar, was all the chemicals and colorings. And have you seen that connection in research?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That is something that we talk about immediately when we're reducing the inflammation levels in these kids right away. So we know that it is contributing to hyperactivity and these different kind of almost like neurotoxic type chemicals that are happening in these little bodies. Again, we go back to that bucket. What are all these different things that are going into that bucket? That's just another chemical that they have to process, because it is a chemical. It's not something that the body can utilize in any other way. The liver and all the detox systems have to process this, and they can be reactive to it. They can also just have too much going on where they can't process it very well. So that chemical storm of, pretty much any sort of standard American diet has, we definitely want to get rid of those. There's so many good options now, for these things that are colored with beet and all these
Mm.
different things. Like, we can choose better now that we know better. Yeah, you grew up in the 80s or 90s, you were definitely getting inundated with that every day, all day. And who knows, that probably is why most of us have health issues. But I think it's
Lunchables.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think of the orange orangutan. What was that stuff? It was like fake orange
Oh,
juice.
was it
Yeah.
Tang? I think.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That kind of stuff. But it's like we have these alternatives now that once we become aware of it, it's not that hard to avoid. And once we get their bodies into a place where they're not so inflamed anymore, I think that we can back off a little bit on kind of being this hyper focus. Like, we don't want to buy it and have it in the house. If they get it one time at school, like, we don't have to put them in a bubble necessarily. We want their bodies to be able to tolerate the world. But we know that we can control their environment at home. When we go out to eat, those kinds of things, we can still control that. But I think that we can get to a place where they can tolerate a little bit of something that isn't perfect, right? At some point. And that's the whole point of this, is to have them live a healthy, happy, normal, joyful kid life. And if an adult's listening to this too, like, obviously we want to get you to a point where you're not consumed by every single thing that could be cause a flare, that could be causing more of this liver issue, this, detox issue, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's important, and I want to be realistic that we don't want to keep these kids in a bubble forever. The whole point is resilience, bringing back that resilience and being able to let them be a kid in the world and be able to tolerate that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a big piece is liver support and reducing inflammation, at least at the start.
That's the name of
Is
the
that?
game for sure.
Mhm,
Yep. Yeah,
mm,
definitely want to reduce whatever's coming into that bucket, overflowing that bucket.
mm. Awesome. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on, or we'll probably touch on other things during the Q&A, but listeners sent in so many questions. If you're ready to go down that huge list.
Yeah, I think we touched on a few of that stuff, but go for it.
Yeah, and it might be probably unrelated to eczema. A lot of these are. A lot of them were on psoriasis, which you touched on. This was a weird one that I've tried to figure out. I mean, there's a million names for health conditions now, right? And you can't know all of them, but this one has been recurring that people have been asking me about called cherry angiomas.
Mhm.
And I did find a connection with halogen toxicity, like specifically bromide, and there's like an iodine connection. It's my understanding these are usually like red kind of spots on the skin. Any thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, cherry angiomas are actually something that I see related more to systemic infections like Lyme and co-infections, Bartonella, Babesia. I do see that correlation. Mold can have a correlation as well. Um, that is more of an underlying cause. So I would look into that a little bit more, which can be kind of scary and a rabbit hole, but I don't see any correlation with eczema, and it's usually more of this systemic issue.
Awesome. Yeah, I was hiking through really thick brush last weekend and got my first few ticks on me, and they're creepy. And I think there's certain tricks like tucking doing something with your socks and your pants and long sleeve shirts. And I sprayed myself in oregano, and I've seen videos like the Dr. Cassinger that passed. He showed a video on YouTube where it wouldn't cross the oregano line. So I think that's one great, and it kills them directly, if you bathe them in it.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Just douse yourself with that. I mean, there definitely are things you can do like that to make sure they're not in there. And if they do, I mean, not every tick is
Yeah.
going to transmit as well. Um, there's some people online that definitely have like some good tips as far as like keep a ticket with you. I keep a tick card in my purse all the time, but I try not to induce too much fear because we want to also be outside in nature.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard like I even just regular tweezers, but they make tick specific ones. Like if you live like us, like near in the forest, basically, it's probably a good thing to keep with you.
For sure. Yeah.
Uh, Um, let's see. This is a good one. Extremely dry face. So dry skin. They tried tallow. It didn't fix it.
Dry, just general dry skin. That's kind of the question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if it's not actually eczema related, it's just more of a dry skin, I would really be thinking about like minerals and nutrient status and that kind of thing. Even fat soluble vitamins, I'd be thinking about as well with dry skin. Tallow is kind of a hit or miss. I know a lot of people use it for eczema and psoriasis and things. It creates kind of a almost like a barrier on the skin that can be it's not always super hydrating. It can be. You might want to think about something more like jojoba oil, emu oil. Those kinds of things are a little bit closer to what our bodies can absorb. Tallow, it can be great, but yeah, if it didn't work, then I would be thinking about more of like the internal piece with that dry skin.
When are steroids appropriate to use, if ever? Do they cause long-term damage to the skin?
Unfortunately, they do cause long-term damage to the skin. If you use them just a little bit here and there, it's not really going to cause long-term issues, but what they do is they thin the skin over time. So that can be a really big issue if you're using them for a long period of time. We didn't really even get into steroids, but that's the conventional approach. And we know that, I mean, you go to a dermatologist, allergist, even pediatrician, the first line of solutions, quote solutions, are going to be steroids. And we know that that is not a solution at all, because what it does is it just suppresses the immune system. So if the immune system is highly reactive and it's showing through the skin, and we're just going to block that off, well, of course, as soon as you stop using it, it's going to come back, because we never got to the real underlying cause in the first place of why the immune system is so reactive. Do I think there's a time and place for steroids? Yeah, I think there could be, in a way that helps us to make sure the inflammation isn't so severe while we're working on the internal piece. So I don't do this often, but it is possible in a very severe case that we start to dilute the steroid that they're using if they've been using it, because you don't want to just cold turkey come off it. You're going to get a huge rebound effect. And that's when TSW, topical steroid withdrawal, can come into play. And that can be really, really rough. I mean, it takes over people's lives. So steroids can have a time and place. You can dilute the lotion that you're using, or whatever, like you can even use like a Vanna cream or something, where you're putting 50% steroid, 50% lotion, and you kind of increase the amount of lotion that you're using over time so that you're decreasing the steroid and you're weaning yourself off it, but you have to be working on that internal piece with the immune and inflammation. So most people don't need to go to steroids right away. Like 95% of people don't need to use steroids. It's never an answer. It's never a long-term solution. And I think people are not informed properly about those long-term effects of steroids. Most people that have TSW never knew that could even be possible. So people are not being informed before. But the thing is that in the allopathic model, they don't have any other solutions. So to expect to go to one of those docs and to get something other than a steroid or an immune suppressant or an inflammation suppressant, you're going to be at a loss. It's not going to happen.
That's fascinating. And I think about like vitamin D, it's called a secosteroid hormone. So we have like natural steroids that we can utilize. And going back to the retinol, the vitamin A piece that's being crucified right now in the health community the last couple of years, the low vitamin A diet, you can get too much, it gets stored in your liver. And meanwhile, they've done therapy with hundreds of thousands of IUs of retinol palmitate short term, and there's tons of benefits to it. So it's not like you're on 300,000 IUs of vitamin A forever. I think that's where people don't understand. It's definitely an essential nutrient. It works with vitamin D at the receptor level. And that probably is a good thing to look into before using kind of pharmaceutical steroids, right? Kind of look at nature's steroids of nutrients and vitamins.
For sure. I mean, those are natural steroids in their body. Cortisol is a natural steroid in our body that's anti-inflammatory. These corticosteroids that are like hydrocortisone and those kinds of topical solutions, those also affect the adrenal system. You're giving yourself this. I mean, hydrocortisone is a form of cortisol. So we know that we're giving little kids these steroids that not only affect their skin, but also affect their adrenal and their HPA access, like the brain to adrenal access. And they're just getting inundated with this stuff. So absolutely, we want to be thinking about how can we make that internal process happen naturally without having to induce these exogenous steroids that have such a poor effect on the system.
Yeah, I didn't know that was the first go-to, because I was raised with the natural stuff. My mom was on it, so it's interesting that they go to that.
Good. Yeah, your mom must have been, I mean, that's especially back then, that is not typical. So good for her.
Yeah, the 90s, and it was homeopathy too, which is interesting. So
yeah.
Tinea versicolor solutions can't be caused by the sun because it's on his chest, he says.
This is a huge fungal thing. So underlying typically fungal issue. So for those that don't know, tinea versicolor is kind of this like patterned skin condition where there's light and dark spots all over the skin. It's a little bit different on different people depending on their underlying skin tone, but usually it looks kind of like this patchiness. And it's not raised, it's not red and inflamed, but it's this like discoloration. And usually there's a fungal component underneath there. So I would definitely look at altering your diet in a way that doesn't feed a lot of yeast. So not doing a ton of starches temporarily, not doing like a ton of even fruit temporarily. Don't want to demonize fruit, but in some cases, when we're trying to kill off and starve the yeast, it can be really helpful. You also probably want to use some herbal antifungals, and you might need a longer term approach, 12 to 16 weeks. Fungus, when it's been there for a while, can really be stubborn. So that could be really helpful.
Awesome. Uh, this is one that kind of relates to my experience. Can you get eczema from stress, or I guess specifically eczema flare-ups? Because that's something I've noticed. Like if I have an extreme stressor in my life, which it's been years since it's happened, but kind of the same location I had growing up on my inner arms would come up that I hadn't seen in years. And so we were just talking about steroids. We were talking about the hydrocortisone shot. So I'd imagine there's kind of like a cortisol connection.
Yes, that is very astute because basically what happens is when we have a high stress load, all of a sudden our cortisol goes through the roof, and that can be great temporarily. It can actually help. If that stress is prolonged, meaning more than even a few hours or like a day, the body has a hard time adapting to that and it can cause inflammation. So cortisol is naturally it's anti-inflammatory in the short term, it's inflammatory in the long term. So you've got too much of that, the immune system goes a little bit haywire. So we know eczema at the root is an immune system imbalance. Cortisol has a direct effect on the immune system, so it can tip that over. And if you've got some things that are normally kind of just on the surface, that can be the one thing that tips everything over and really starts to show things. So we never really, like, there's no cure for eczema. There's no actual, like, you never can get it again. You can get it again if you've put it into remission. Stress is a big one because it starts to tip that over again when the immune system can get a little imbalanced. So yeah, there's a big piece there for sure. We see that moms who had massive amounts of stress in their pregnancies have a higher chance of kids having eczema as well.
Wow. And kind of on the same vein, someone asked random rashes that come and go, which it could be food sensitivities as well, right?
hmm Could be. That's a hard one because it could be a lot of different things. I would definitely be looking at all the different variables when that comes up. So how's your stress? How's your sleep? Are you traveling? Are you eating differently? Those kinds of things. Um, and just try to see what variables are controllable and see if you can try to pinpoint anything. Because random rashes without knowing um it could be, yeah, it could be definitely allergic. Something you're using could be topical, could be laundry. That's kind of a hard question to answer.
Yeah, laundry's a big one. I use the detergent from Shen Blossom, which is pretty clean. But even the clean ones at the health food store, there's still some crazy chemicals in there.
Well, and even essential oils. Some people don't do
Yeah.
well with products that have essential oils in them. So maybe that's too strong for you.
hmm Jock itch or ringworm on the groin, caught in gym, can't get rid of it, and now I'm pregnant. Ideas on
Mm, I'm sorry, Mama.
that.
That is a little bit difficult because you can't do too many antifungals when you're pregnant. You can do something called Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a yeast-eating yeast probiotic. So it's not a bacteria. Go really, really, really slow though. Don't use a ton of it. You can also do topically, you can do rosemary hydrosol, which is a diluted version of a rosemary essential oil that can topically help to kind of get some of the fungal things to go away, but then also just internally helping the yeast a little bit. And so that probiotic is helpful just because we're not going in and directly killing any yeast. Just be careful. Sometimes Saccharomyces boulardii can flare yeast a little bit, but sometimes it gets a little bit worse before it gets better. So use that topical stuff too, and that should help.
Awesome. What causes, they're asking, pressure-induced urticaria? Keep getting painful flare-ups.
I think of histamine issues. So yeah, definitely histamine. So anytime that you put pressure on something. So I assume what they mean is like they're sitting and, when they get up, like the back of their legs are in hives or something like that. Typically, there's a histamine issue at play, could also be fungal. So going back to that dampness, if ever we close off a part of the body in this like dark, maybe damp back of the legs get sweaty, that kind of thing, fungus can come out and can really show a little bit more, but usually there's a histamine underlying piece as well. Fungus can create histamine issues. So anybody that has any sort of histamine issue, we've got to find out why, because there's not just that their immune system is bad and it's producing too much. Fungus and histamine go hand in hand, so it could be a fungal thing underlying there too.
Hmm. I'm sure you see a lot of families relying on like Benadryl and antihistamines.
Yeah, that can be a big thing. We don't want to give kids that too much long term. It can be helpful in the short term when they're going crazy, but lots of natural antihistamines we can use work really well.
Mm-hmm. You ever use like quercetin or
Hmm.
dihydroquercetin?
Yeah, yep. I
Awesome.
like the product Dehist a lot, which has quercetin in it, nettle, vitamin C. Those are all antihistamines.
Mm, awesome. Yeah, I wonder how effective it would be to just have a kid taking vitamin C consistently throughout the day instead of, only once or a mega dose all at once. Because my benefit personally has been kind of spread out small frequent doses of vitamin C. So
Yeah, if you're doing that specifically, if you've got histamine issues, it is more beneficial to do it throughout the day so that you're getting some support. It's really important, like first thing when you get up, to combat that, because when cortisol raises first thing in the morning, the histamine can also get exacerbated by that. So you want to take it first thing in the morning, and then usually at least 12 hours later. You can even break it up more than that.
great. Tips to treat seborrheic, I'm butchering that name, dermatitis and dandruff.
So dandruff is usually a fungal piece on the skin. It can also be, I never say this word right, malassezia, I think is how you say it. So that is a fungal condition that is colonized on the scalp, face, and sometimes the neck. So they're not always happening together. They can be. Malassezia happens more when it gets kind of like pink and crusty and that kind of thing. But if they start to see it like on the sides of their nose, their eyelids, their even like their chin, their face, really anywhere in addition to their scalp, definitely think about malassezia and a fungal component. I see that any sort of really scalp issue is usually a fungal.
What about athlete's foot and solutions for that?
We're just on a
Or sticking it,
fungal
yeah,
roll here.
that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Yep, that's
Other
definitely
fungus.
fungal. So again, what does fungus love? Damp, dark environments. That's basically what a shoe is.
Yeah.
So if you've got internal yeast, you are more likely to get these topical fungal issues. So again, you can use something like rosemary hydrosol, spray that on your feet, let it dry off a couple times a day. You definitely want to be out of your shoes as much as possible so it's not in that damp environment. And then think about an internal fungal piece too. So um, I know you're a fan of the oregano and that kind of stuff, and that can be really helpful for fungus. What I find is that once it's colonized inside and it's expressing externally, we need to rotate things so that it doesn't get resilient to it. So definitely whatever antifungal product you're using, you don't want to do it more than 4 weeks. You want to switch that up, do something else. A lot of times we need a fatty acid component and we need an herbal antifungal. So there's different ones like caprylic acid and undecilenic acid and those kinds of things that you want to pair it with something antifungal like rosemary, thyme, pau d'arco. Oregano's one, but it's quite strong, so we have to be careful. Yeah, those are my solutions.
I haven't done it in years, but when I used to use it in the sauna, I would rub it on the soles of my feet to get it just systemic, and it would be really intense. Like it felt more intense than doing shots of it for some reason, because I guess there's so many pores in the foot, but it just felt like it was flooding my entire body more than taking it orally, using it through my feet in the sauna when my pores were open.
Oh,
Pretty
I can
intense.
imagine. Oregano oil is super hot, so it burns like heck on the skin. And yeah, I can imagine putting that all over an area was not very pleasant.
Definitely felt more clear-headed for sure, but maybe it was just the shock. I
Yeah.
don't know. Someone asked, what causes dishydrosis on feet and hands, seasonal, and how to heal it? I've never heard of that. I've heard of like hyperhidrosis is like sweaty palms, right? But I don't know.
It is. I wonder if they mean dyshydrotic eczema. It's a very particular kind of
Oh,
eczema that's
okay.
only
Interesting.
on the hands and feet. So even though it's only presenting there, same root causes that we talked about.
Okay. so many names for all these things, right? It's just
Yeah,
nuts.
yeah.
But the same same solution generally.
Well, and the thing is
Yeah.
I think there we all have an area of weakness where things can present, right? So like
Mhm.
some people it presents, yeah, through their hands and feet. Some people it's through eczema that's on their entire body. Other people it might be something else. It might be in their respiratory tract or I think COVID showed us a lot of this where people got COVID and then it exacerbated whatever weakness they had. So I've had, clients in the past when I was working mostly with adults where they would have like a lot of asthma or even if they hadn't had asthma in years or they hadn't had a colitis flare in years, they got COVID and then I hope I can say that word. We're on a podcast, right? um, and then it would exacerbate whatever their weakness was. So I think COVID really showed us what our weaknesses were as far as like, and I don't mean we're weak humans. I mean that like
Yeah.
we genetically have some of these pathways that can be a little bit weak. And, I think that's how we get some of these things that are different, where like eczema, the thing with eczema is it's not like a one size fits all. Like there's actually no test for eczema. It's just a doctor looking at it and saying, yes, you have eczema. And the reason for that is because there's not one actual cause. If you look up eczema on the internet, they say that it's probably a combination of genetics and environmental issues. That's all that they know. They don't know anything more than that. So just to say that, like, I think that there are these different ways that present, but many things in holistic health have very similar underlying pinnings.
Yeah, it has to be frustrating for parents that, I mean, I guess that's why Instagram and Facebook or the health communities on there are so popular now because it's better. A lot of the times, just listening to educators is better than going to the doctor. I guess you can get free solutions and things to try, but I bet a lot of parents just Google, like you said, see that, and then go to the doctor and they just get prescribed steroids. It's probably like the most common thing, right?
Absolutely. And let's be honest, like the research that comes out takes at least 20 years, they say, to get into the doctor's office because these docs have been educated maybe 20, 30, maybe even 40 years ago. A lot of them don't do this kind of education that keeps them in the loop. A lot of these docs actually get their education from the pharmaceutical reps. So they're not going to be up on what's going on. And people like you and these people online are the ones that are really looking at the research, interviewing experts, knowing to keep up on what's actually new because we didn't even know about a lot of this gut health stuff 10, 15 years ago. So a lot of these docs, they don't know about it. They don't have any correlation to this stuff. So really going online and it can be maddening sometimes, but it can also be helpful to actually get what the latest research is.
Yeah, exactly. Recently, I flew down to California for my dad's birthday, and I was sitting next to a guy from Alaska, a doctor, a cardiologist, and we were just talking for 3 hours. And I was trying to get some health information out of him, and I told him I own a supplement company, and et cetera. And I said, "Hey, do you know about vitamin E for heart health? There was these Shoot brothers in Canada, and they work with thousands of heart, patients with different, and even beyond heart with eye issues and all sorts of stuff, and use vitamin E therapeutically in high doses." And he had no idea. And I said, "Well, what supplements do you take yourself?" And he said, "Oh, coenzyme Q10 from Costco, though, and it gives me an upset stomach every time I take it." I'm just like, "What? This guy's a cardiologist, like just
They have
taking."
no training in that stuff. They
Right.
absolutely have no training. So when you see a supplement bottle that says ask your doctor first, I always laugh and I'm like, they're not going to know anything. Like you
Right.
need a real holistic health practitioner, someone that knows what's going on to ask about this stuff.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah. Um, let's see. We had like specific nutrient questions here. I think, well, actually, I had a question since you brought up COVID, and I don't think we'll get, I mean, I'm already banned enough. So they asked, is there any correlation with injections? Like, I know when I went to college, I think it was called the Tdap. I got shot up with that. My mom was upset because I kind of just, it's like, oh, I want to go, and they're not going to let me, go to this college if I don't get it. And she wanted to do some research first. And I think it definitely exacerbated my skin conditions after I got that um, injection. But have you seen correlation there with just even school shots and stuff?
Yeah, big time. That's a big one just because if we think about what are the vaccines asking of the body? Sorry, the injections asking of the body. We know that it's asking the immune system to react to this agent to create antibodies, right? In eczema specifically, these kids, as we've discussed so much already, these kids have a very overreactive, overburdened immune system. So when we put one more big thing, big ask on the immune system, it usually doesn't go so well. We know that there's other adjuvants and things that go into these jabs, and that can really just overload their toxin bucket too. So it's a big thing. And, there's a big question of like, is it even necessary? Why are so many of these necessary? You're asking a lot of these little bodies over a short period of time. And if their immune system is already so overwhelmed, it's a little bit too much. Sometimes it's way too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's things like colostrum, just like natural things that have a similar effect, right? So,
Yeah, I mean, we need to be able to make their body resilient enough to be in the world naturally. I think that's one thing. But then, maybe we don't have to totally go against this stuff. Maybe there is some room for it. I'm not totally black or white. I think that I don't want to just throw this like Western medicine model totally out. I'm super crunchy, but I'm also realistic, and I think that there can be a place for it because I know some kids they have to have this to be able to go to school because their parents can't stay home with them. It's just not an option, right? So how can we work with those kinds of people that maybe we can still make it allowable that they can go to school, but it's a lot less on their body. Maybe we can have a modified schedule where they're not getting so much in them, and then that can give them a better chance of not reacting.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think social media, I've been kind of meditating on how the romanticized kind of homesteader off-grid life, and usually there's like this perfect picture that's pushed on social media, like everybody should do this, everyone should have 10 kids and work the farm and cows and goats and whatever. And I'm the same way with like homeschooling, because I think that's another thing that's probably guilted on parents, like you should always homeschool, but maybe it's not an option. Every situation is different, right? And so I think the adaptability factor, like you just talked about, is important.
Yeah, and I'm totally in that camp. Like I'm in the homesteader, super crunchy, want to homeschool. And I think that works. That is what is going to work for us. But I work with a lot of families where that's just not a possibility. So we can't tell them, well, it's all or nothing, good luck. So we have to actually give them solutions that can help and not tell them that you have to go to this route of life because, I mean, you and I are entrepreneurs. Like we can kind of do what we want, but not everyone is like that. Not everyone has that kind of lifestyle. So I like to be a little bit realistic on some of this stuff.
Mhm. I think we touched on parasites a little bit. This is something, my raw vegan days. I mean, I went totally neurotic on it, just trying to get every last worm out of my body. But this question, is it true eczema is caused partially or fully by parasites? I know it's a real thing, and I know you can get it from like walking in the grass, especially if there's, animal poop on the ground and stuff can grow there. And it's, I think that they kept talking about hookworm there, but there's several species, right?
Mhm. It can be a piece of eczema. We see parasites come up on stool testing. Stool testing is not the best way to detect parasites because they don't want to come out in the body. They don't want to be detected. They evade the immune system very well. So they sometimes do not show up on testing, although I definitely see it happen. It is not the only thing, as we talked about the other things that are overgrown that can be causing eczema. Um, I put my feet on the grass all the time, and I don't want to live in fear of not being able to do that. So, what's the difference there? How can we build resilience? One of the things that I really look at are two things that build resilience specifically in the gut. So, the gut immune system is super important. We can measure that. It's called secretory IgA. We measure that on stool testing, and that can tell us how much gut immune army do you have to fight? That's really important. If it's really depleted, I've seen some kids where it's not even detected, which is crazy. They have no defense against things coming in through food, water, air, all that stuff. The other piece is their digestion and that their stomach acid too, because a lot of the stuff, like you can get it in the grass and outside, but a lot of this stuff we get exposed to all the time through those three routes: food, water, air. Go to a salad bar, even stuff that you pull out of your own garden, it can have stuff on it. So, what makes it stick in our body versus what makes it pass through? We want to have sufficient stomach acid so that it kills everything off, it sterilizes it, and then that secretory IgA, that gut immune piece, to make sure. And those are the two main things that I am working on, especially with these kids, to make sure that they increase their resilience. But how many people are so stressed that they probably have no stomach acid, right? Like that's a big piece. And it's like, eat your food, eat your meals in the most relaxed state that you can without distraction. That's one of the best things that you can do for yourself. Still go on the grass, put your feet in the grass and that kind of thing. I mean, don't walk on poop, but there's these pieces of resilience that are important so that we can live in the world and not be so scared of it.
Hmm. Do you ever use immunoglobulins, like you mentioned IgA, temporarily or therapeutically? Like I know there's companies that sell combinations of IgG, IgA, like a blend of those.
All the time. I love
Hmm.
immunoglobulins. So colostrum is one of those that provides natural immunoglobulins. In eczema kiddos, we don't like to use anything with dairy. So we use these other forms of immunoglobulins that are dairy free, and those can be amazing. So what they do is they start to heal the gut. They can really help food sensitivities. They help give a boost to that gut immune army, that secretory IgA. Really, really helpful. And you can go pretty high dose with that stuff because it's not killing anything. It's really just helpful.
Oh, it's interesting. I'm gonna try megadosing it because I megadosed everything else.
Yeah.
So-
Go for it.
Any thoughts on B5 and D-ribose? B5 in the skin, if there's a connection of D-ribose and oil glands. Any thoughts on any of that?
I'm not familiar. I'm not like a all-around skin expert, but I obviously there's a lot of overlap with some of these things, but
Yeah.
not familiar.
Yeah. I'm sure the mechanisms with like every nutrient, I mean, you could probably go down all the B vitamins, and I'm sure there's certain pathways that relate to the skin, right? So it gets complex.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about more of the fat-soluble vitamins and fatty
Mhm.
acids, but absolutely. I mean, all of that is needed for like ATP and energy production, and that's in every cell in your body. So yeah, I'm sure it can get really complex.
Do you pay attention to like the degree of saturation? Because I've gone deep down that rabbit hole of, and I think now it's super trending of, seed oils are, bad the last like 2 or 3 years. But do you think that shifting the, polyunsaturated acid ingestion versus the saturated makes a huge difference in like kids with eczema?
It's hard to say because there's so many variables. We definitely do educate parents on the seed oil issue. Um, it's definitely something that we want them to be aware of. I see it more of a like total load problem. So it's like if you get a little bit of sunflower oil in this piece of hummus, like is it going to be the
Mhm.
worst thing? Probably not. But it's like accumulation. If you've got it in all the different processed products that you're eating, that's going to be a problem for sure. It's hard to say. I mean, we do give kids omega sometimes because it does help with the skin. Um, we don't do straight up vitamin E, which I know can be really helpful to combat some of this overload with the polyunsaturated fats. But it's more of just kind of being aware, choosing the certain products that have different kinds of oils in them versus like more of the seed oils. And I really don't go too much farther than that. It's just, I would love to know specifically like how much it does affect the inflammation levels and the oxidative stress and that kind of stuff. I think it's really hard to know because there are so many variables, especially like just within the diet alone, let alone everything else going on.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, looking through the questions, and I think we got through most of them. Uh,
Amazing. There was a
y-
lot.
yeah, it was great. Trying to see if there's, yeah, GAPS diet. I kind of already talked to just about, usually it's dairy and gluten that you want to limit, and maybe even fruit at some point, potentially. Um, yeah, I think that was awesome. So,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
where can people find you?
I'm just Abbie Bradford on Instagram, underscore Abbie Bradford, ABBIE. They can check out stuff there, send me a message. Any questions, happy to chat.
Awesome. And you're working right now, like one-on-one with people?
I do work more in a group format. So I do have an eczema program for kids. So we work with
Cool.
kids from 3 months up to 17 years of age. We definitely work mostly with kids, I would say, from like 6 months to 2 years. That's really when the prime eczema issues happen, but we can work with a lot of different kids. We really do the full approach. So we work in usually a 4 month format. We're helping people to get through at least like teaching them how to live in a way that can be eczema friendly and getting to the root cause of these things. And so it's definitely we give them a lot of one-on-one support throughout that, but we find that that kind of container is actually better because eczema just affects every part of life where we need to think about the clothes they're wearing, the water, the air. I mean, it's just kind of like everything. It's not just like let's do a gut test and see what's going on.
I appreciate what you're doing because when I've looked into this the last several years, having dealt with it, the only message I see mainly being pushed by the natural health community is just eat more animal foods or drink raw milk, or it's like these very broad kind of recommendations. And like you said earlier, it's not a one size fit all approach. You have to look at the individual factors and their environment and parents' history, and there's so many things to it. So yeah, just thanks for what you're doing. It's great.
Absolutely. I love this so much. I love because I feel like it fills such a huge gap. And these parents, these kids, like they are suffering, everyone in the family suffers. And so I love what I do. And yeah, I appreciate that. And I mean, I wish it was one thing. We always wish it was one thing. It would be so much easier. I would not have a job if it was one thing, though. That's why I'm here.
Well, thanks, Abbie. Stick around as we close out the show.
Awesome. Thanks.
Well, that was a really interesting chat with Abbie. If you'd like to work with her, she's on Instagram. Her account is underscore Abbie with 2 B's Bradford. She shares a ton of free information there, and then you could work directly with her if you'd like. I think it's wild that the conventional approach to eczema is steroids. Fortunately, I didn't go that route, thanks to my mom for using homeopathy and aloe vera, as I mentioned in the show. And like I said, it was not until I increased my enzyme intake from about 2010 to 2012, that was the raw vegan lifestyle. But then I started supplementing capsule enzyme products, and that inspired me to come out with mine with Mitolife, the dissolve it all systemic enzymes, and the digest it all digestive enzymes. I always say that that was one of the best things that I got out of that experiment was the power and the importance of getting enzymes into our body. Because yes, I was getting micronutrients, probably minerals that I haven't had in years, but I really feel that it was mostly the enzymes that helped to clear up my skin from both eczema and acne. My website is matt-blackburn.com. You could read about my CLF protocol and then see all of my recommended products, most of which have discount codes. I just added a new one. It's transdermal glutathione called Glutaril. And the one I like is their super formula called Glutaril Plus. I've been very vocal about being anti-liposomal, like micelle formulated supplements. I think they're a scam, they're overrated. And most of the glutathione products I've tried over the years, 90% of them were the liposomal oral form, and I never felt anything from them. This one I felt immediately. It's really powerful, especially combined with vitamin C and vitamin E. There's this synergy between those three nutrients. And then you just add in melatonin every night, supplemental before bed. And then you really have the antioxidant defense system locked in. My brand is Mitolife. You can find that at mitolife.co. We're currently having quite the sale on many of the products. So jellyfish collagen, zinc carnosine, beef liver, elk velvet antler, desiccated oyster, digestive enzymes, a whole bunch of stuff. We also have the best drinking water filter on the market. Built that from scratch with my friends. That's under the water tab. It's the 7-stage water solution. A lot of people are looking for compact or easy to install. When we're talking about water that's going to become your blood, you really don't want to cut corners, because then you're cutting corners on the quality of your blood. So if you value your health, it's go to the best. And the best is the Mitolife 7-stage filter. It fits under most kitchen sinks in the cabinet. There's a storage tank. So when you buy the install kit with the filter, you get everything you need to install it. I've installed a lot of filters like this with the same connections, and it's really easy. If you're somewhat handy, it's possible to do it without a plumber, but if you're worried about it, then you could definitely hire a plumber to install it, and it shouldn't take more than an hour or two maximum to get it live. Making a lot of changes behind the scenes. I am discontinuing the Mitolife Academy just because I have a lot of things I'm juggling in my personal life, and because there was only about 100 members in there. Although they're awesome, diehard members, it was just a lot of time and energy every month to go into that. So I think I'm going to focus more on public lives, public interactions, as I used to do, and just refocus my energy into more productive endeavors. But thank you to the loyal 100 Mitolife Academy members on YouTube that stuck with me over the 4 years. There's hundreds of videos. Going to see if I could bundle those together and make it available to purchase if people want 4 years of content, of protocols and experiments and all the things I've been learning over the last 4 years. So lots of exciting things to come, a lot of changes, but they're all good. And I will update you guys on that ASAP. Till next time, see you next Friday. Stay supercharged.